At Oysters Carolina, we do so much. So we're kind of vertically integrated. So we actually grow the oysters, we distribute the oysters, which is probably the most challenging part of my job. And then we also do events and things like that where we're cooking the oysters as well. So we kind of do it all. So I don't know if you call us a chef or a farmer or a driver, but we're kind of all those things.
One of my really special memories growing up was our dad waking us up at like 4 in the morning when it was still really dark and putting us in our little camo overalls, and we'd have like the full face like toboggan, like warm beanie type things and just gloves and everything, and being freezing and going out on the water and fishing in the New River. And we were always trying to catch a trout. Like we always just wanted the big trout. And these stories like really make me happy because my brother passed away about 9 years ago, and he was also a boat captain and just a super salty guy. And
having been a country boy and raised in the country, I tell people, if you grew up in the country back then, you had to know how to farm, you had to know how to fish, you had to know how to hunt, you had to know how to build, you had to know how to cut firewood. When I was real small, if the wind was calm and the weather was pretty mild and not much tide, I wasn't strong enough to get the net on the boat by myself. But if the net was on the boat ready to go, I could take a long 10-foot oar and I could pull the net off. And I'll never forget doing that. And pretty soon I saw the corks bobbing up and down. I knew it was catching fish. And I was pretty young and I was getting rather excited, so I just took it up. And I'll never forget, I had 60 pounds of fish. And my father came down to the landing and took one look, and he said, well, if you'd left it there a little longer, you'd have had 100. I thought for me the 60 pounds was pretty good, you know, but anyhow.
When the folks at Coastal Carolina Riverwatch started hearing from both the commercial and recreational fishing community about water quality and its impacts on local fisheries, they quickly realized the issues were interconnected. They believed the work of the organization would be of value for both groups.
So we started talking to these fishermen more. We developed the Water Quality for Fisheries program, and then looped in this industry working group that's made up of both commercial and recreational fishermen.
Clean water is so important, and the reason for that is that without the clean water, we're not going to have the fisheries or the environmental studies or the kids playing in the water, because it wouldn't be an option. And if it was an option, it probably wouldn't be as safe of an option or as fun or as pleasurable of an option. And who wants their kids playing around in a bunch of trash or toxic water, which, you know, is something that we've been dealing with in the Cape Fear a little bit. And as parents, we're all kind of concerned about that and taking steps to do what we can to mitigate what we're having to deal with and expose our children and our bodies to.
Survey results from coastal fishermen, both commercial and recreational, identified 5 areas of concern for water quality and how they were affecting fisheries. Areas identified were agriculture and factory farm pollution, stormwater runoff, industrial pollutants, plastics infiltrating the water, and septic tanks and municipal wastewater treatment plants.
When I was growing up in the New River, bizarrely, I remember as a child there being a huge hog waste spill. And as a kid, I didn't really know what that meant other than, are we swimming in poop? Like, what are we doing? But we still went to the river, and I remember it being a concern. Don't swallow the water. Try not to open your eyes under the water, that kind of stuff.
Duplin County, where Stockenhead Creek is located, is one of the densest areas in the United States for concentrated animal feeding operations. Stockinghead Creek here sort of typifies many of the other creek watersheds in this county, in that there are probably a good dozen swine CAFOs in this watershed and even more poultry CAFOs. Now, this particular creek is now on the state's 303D list for excessive fecal bacteria counts. So you might ask, where do these fecal bacteria come from?
What happens during a large storm is we have a lot of flooding, and that flooding gets into the hog lagoons, and everything raises up, and then all the hog lagoon waste is just put into our system, whether it's in streams, whether it's rivers or down to the estuaries, and eventually all that stuff is gonna run down to the Sound.
The swine CAFOs around here, what they do with the waste that's in the lagoons, they spray off onto the surrounding field. Some portion of that is going to keep going up, and it's going to come down on somebody else. Research at NC State University has demonstrated that these pollutants can go as far as 60 miles downwind before they're deposited. And of course, what you have 60 miles downwind is very sensitive coastal waters. The pollutants we have to worry about there are fecal bacteria and viruses, and also ammonium. Ammonium is an irritant to humans. The state has historically taken a hands-off attitude toward agricultural areas, when in fact some of these areas are highly polluting.
When you have concentrated levels of animal feces, into our waterways, you're going to have fish kills. You're going to have large algal blooms that are going to suck dissolved oxygen out of the water and kill a lot of things, not just fish. And let's be real, nobody wants to swim in water that's full of hog waste. It's really important for us to regulate the farms. It's important for us to, to keep these hog lagoons from flooding and getting in our waterways.
Water quality is one of the few things that there's virtually universal agreement upon between academics and fishermen. There are lots and lots of conflicts on all sorts of topics, but everybody is pretty much in agreement that water quality is a major issue for fisheries. And it's a major issue for fisheries in a couple of different contexts for me. The first one is nutrient pollution. Nutrient pollution comes from agriculture, about half of it, and the other half of it comes from human beings.
With storm runoff, anytime you have impervious surfaces, so surfaces that can't be penetrated by rain, so if you make a parking lot or a street, that was area that the water would normally rain down and soak through the ground, be filtered. When you pave those surfaces, you're going to have less amount of filtration, and you're going to have higher chance of flash floods.
Behind us is Ward's Creek. Ward's Creek extends about 4.5 miles upstream, and where it begins in the headwaters, if you can call them that, which is a ditch coming out of open ground farms, 60,000 acre massive agricultural operation. You got to figure there's herbicides, pesticides, certainly nitrates. But worst of all is the sediment from the years of ditching up there at the headwaters. If we were to walk out off the end of the dock and jump in the water, we'd sink down to our knees in muck, which is a real problem for the oysters. This is an aspect of clean water we often don't think about, is the sediment that comes out of development.
After the waterway was cut, it so interrupted the natural flow of the creeks that bit by bit they began to fill up more and more shallow. What it is, you have a lot of more houses along the Sound front, and so you have more runoff.
Algal blooms are a natural phenomenon, but with increased nutrients, they happen much more frequently, and their impact on fisheries is when you either get loss of oxygen in the water column and dead zones. If you want to see a dead zone, there's one off the Gulf of Mexico that's bigger than Rhode Island. That's generated by all the nutrients that come down the Mississippi. Here we get dead zones whenever, after a real heavy rain, and you get lots of nutrients from the land, and a consequence of that is algal blooms. And then the algae die, and you use up all the oxygen and the fish die.
It's a real quick 2 or 3 day event, sometimes just a few hours, but it'll kill everything that can't move out of that area. That includes organisms like shellfish, oysters, which are essential for filtering our water, not just for food. They filter water, help clean the water. As they clear the water up, it helps other habitat like grass beds get sunlight to grow. So when you have a low oxygen event and it kills those oysters, it affects everything around it. It's one of those things that most people don't realize. They don't see it unless they get to see a glimpse of it on the news, a bunch of menhaden floating washed up dead on the shore, and they don't realize the long-term impacts, how it impacts larval stage fish, these really small microscopic sized fish that can't move out of the way. Well, they all die, and that's next year's crop. So it's really essential for everything that has to do with fisheries, fish abundance, habitat. Water quality is the key to all of that.
I care very much about the quality of water in this creek, and I will say that it's a very fishable creek. There's even shrimp out there from time to time, but the oysters can't make it. They try to grow, and then the sediment kills them.
It impacts recreational fisheries as much as it does commercial. I think the commercial fishermen realize it more than the average recreational, just because we spend so much time on the water. And also, it's not enjoyment, it's not a hobby, it's not recreation. It impacts our families, our livelihoods. If we're not making an income, I can't pay my mortgage.
With us at Harker's Island, you know, that's actually one of the reasons why Harker's Island is so great. We don't have, you know, a lot of development. We don't have huge parking lots. And so Harker's Island actually is an example of kind of, you know, where our state should be.
So for my entire career, I've been passionate about water quality. That's the research that I do. And specifically, what I'm interested in is to understand how pollutants that are used in our daily lives, all the way from industry, all the way through consumer products, and into things that occur even in stormwater, how those contaminants get into water and how they impact both human health as well as environmental health.
Anything that happens upstream in the Cape Fear River definitely concerns us, because actually our home is in the area where we're being fed that water in our home. So we've had to install a system for our cooking and drinking needs. And for a long time, we were just buying jugs of water, which is wasteful in itself. We want to reduce our plastic use. We don't want to have to expand it. And so you're at a conundrum where we are, because do we install this huge system in our homes which is very expensive, to mitigate having these toxins? Or are we just going to buy all these plastic bottles that I haven't been buying for 15 years now? Like, I've been off the plastic for a long time, and it's just really hard to know what's the right thing to do.
In about 2017, 2018, I became involved in a project that has emerged as the North Carolina PFAS network. This is per and polyfluorinated alkyl substance testing network. It's a mouthful, but really it was born of concern over the occurrence of a class of contaminants that is used in many, many different applications, both in industry as well as in our daily lives. Everything from firefighting foams to Teflon cookware to coatings and metal plating operations in industrial settings. And these chemicals are unique among many of the different chemical components that we use in consumer products, because they never degrade in the environment. Now, for many, many years, the residents of Wilmington, North Carolina and surrounding areas were faced with a situation where these contaminants, because of their discharge from industrial producers upstream, were entering their water treatment plants, and the water treatment mechanisms are not designed to remove those chemicals. Now, in North Carolina, we both source and sink our drinking water in many cases to rivers. Right? We use surface water not only as a source of drinking water, but as a disposal mechanism for our wastewater. Obviously, there's concern for human health due to drinking water, but there's also concern over ecosystem health due to release of these compounds, and as we all know, rivers flow to the sea. And so if you live downstream, as the people who live along the coast do, right, you are essentially at the receiving end of all the processes that are occurring in those watersheds upstream of us.
Are definitely worried about our livelihoods. My husband's livelihood is also in the water when it comes to the amount of poison that's in the Cape Fear River that directly affects the intercoastal waterway, which is where most of my business would be based. When people hear there's poison in the water, they're not as inclined to want to take their entire family out and swim and frolic in that same poison water.
And so there are a lot of concerns now that some of these PFAS chemicals actually could be accumulating in fish, shellfish, and other recreationally and commercially important fisheries that could have impacts on human health due to consumption, as well as ecosystem health due to potential toxicity.
Fishermen also are concerned about microplastics and plastics in the environment. There are two parts to plastic. There's the part you can see, which is what you can hold in your hand and what things like turtles and fish eat. And then there's the part you can't see that's chemicals that have leached out of that plastic. And I'm not sure which is worse.
So it's become a huge crisis because these plastics now can break up into such small particles that they can be ingested and are ingested by plankton, which is the base of the food web.
If you look at any old piece of plastic from Walmart, for example, there are between 150 and 250 different compounds that you can measure that leach out of that plastic.
So to date, research has proven that plastic is impacting negatively everything from plankton to blue whales and everything in between.
Now I'm learning about the contaminants associated with plastics. Who are the most toxic dolphins swimming around out there? The adult males. Because old guys like I don't have a way to offload these toxins, so we keep accumulating them. Beyond a litter issue or a fisheries bycatch issue, it's an ethical issue to me because it's a horrible way to die.
With microplastics affecting oysters, probably the biggest issue is we don't know the outcomes. We don't have any long-term studies, right? Plastic hasn't been around long enough. But what we do know is that's going to enter the oyster, and if we eat the oyster, then that's going to enter us. And consuming plastic has a whole host of issues.
What this is a grab sample. So the research that we were doing out in the middle of the ocean was a surface sample. We would drag a net for an hour. This is just one grab. And unfortunately, we're finding a lot of plastic particles in this, in a size fraction around 125 micron. So though this looks nice and clean and you could almost feel like you could drink it, you'd actually be ingesting plastic particles, as well as other things like pharmaceuticals and other plastic chemicals. So the research that we're doing with the river keepers is going to be really beneficial when we start thinking of ways where we may have to retrofit our wastewater treatment plants so that we can get more of the fibers out, so that we can get more of the chemicals out. Because this water is actually being released back into our rivers, right? And if it's filled with man-made chemical compounds, it's impacting everything.
Plastic's really unusual. It's a platform. So it comes with a bunch of molecules and can deliver them to your body, and it leaves with a bunch of different molecules that it's taken out of your body. So I think that if we're going to deal with some of these things, we need to re-engineer how we make stuff and make it cleaner in the first place.
I actually call it the apex predator of the sea because it indiscriminately is able to kill or maim any marine life.
For years there were people that would even have septic tank lines draining down too near the water. Of course now that is very carefully regulated, and more you're having city plumbing and city sewer, so you don't have quite as much of that problem. But here's what broke my heart. Right up at the mouth of the creek, they put a big sewer station. Well, about every year it breaks loose, and just tons of raw sewage will come down the creek. And so help me, I have gotten in my boat and gone up the creek, and when I'd see dead fish floating, that told you how bad it was. And when you got further up the creek, you would even find dead eels. And eels can live in very polluted conditions, and if the water is toxic enough to kill the eels, then you know it's bad.
In addition to nutrient pollution, people take all sorts of pharmaceuticals. I take 7 drugs a day because I'm old. All of those go into our sewage system, and they all come out into the environment. So there are animals on Prozac, there are animals that are on blood thinners, there are animals that are on low cholesterol drugs, birth control pills, all sorts of things like that that are causing problems with water quality. They're not going away because they are engineered to be eaten, and your gut is really good at breaking down things. So once they get out of your body, they're going to stay that way for a while.
We all know the water quality is worse. Like I said, one reason, of course, there's been more building near the waterfront, there's been more runoff, the inner sounds being shallower, there's not a good exchange on the high to low tides to quickly remove and dilute any pollution, and why they would set up pumping stations so near the water, knowing that if they break down and overflow, they're going to go right in the creek. I don't know why they will do that.
Well, you could look at how expensive it is right now to even live in a place like Morehead City because you're paying for your sewage cleanup, and then realize that we're not cleaning up our sewage adequately for fish and things like blue crabs and oysters to live effectively. Blue crabs are really good at getting rid of toxic compounds like metals because they have a system that does that. Shrimp do that too. A lot of fish can't do that very well, and a lot of fish get into issues with respect to what they're eating and whether or not they can reproduce. So we could clean it up. We'd actually have to pay for it. The technology is available. It's been available since the 1950s. It's just people don't want to spend the money. You can look around the world and find out that in places like Singapore, they actually convert sewage into drinking water. And the way they do that is get rid of all the particulates and then get rid of everything but water using membrane technology that was developed in the United States. It's the same way you do desalination.
As you can see, there are many challenges to North Carolina's coastal fisheries stemming from various water quality issues. The fishing community is sounding the alarm for these fragile ecosystems. But the question is, how will we respond to this tidal alert?
Coastal Carolina Riverwatch, our service area on paper is Carteret and Onslow County and a little bits of some other areas, but it's really the White Oak River Basin area of North Carolina. However, when we started working on this program with our coastal fishermen, we realized that we really needed to make this program reach the entire coast, and so we've been working to do so. So everything's connected to everything. These communities are connected to each other. Their issues are the same issues, and so we're working to collaborate with groups in order to solve these water quality issues that are up and down the coast.
So now, as an adult and with a child, being in the Cape Fear River, it is a concern. Like we're catching our fish most of the time here in the Cape Fear when we are catching our flounder or drum, and we take those home and eat them. And so what kind of bioaccumulation are we dealing with there? Are we actually eating just tons of Gen X and PFAS and all the other chemicals that are floating around in our water and in our fish now. So it's a huge question, and it is a concern, but also eating fish out of the wild is supposed to be a healthy thing.
What concerns me and many others are the impacts on marine wildlife, certainly. These dolphins are eating the same food we eat. Flounder, spot, croaker, mullet, mackerel, pretty much, yeah. And so it certainly has implications for human health.
There are many fisheries that depend on clean water in North Carolina. And this is a huge issue for tourism, for the fisheries themselves, and for recreational fishermen.
Whether you're coming to the beach to swim, whether you're coming to the beach to fish, whether you've lived at the coast for centuries, you can trace your generations back, whether you make a living on the water as a guide, as a commercial fisherman or woman, as an oyster farmer, any of that stuff is going to go away if we don't have good water quality.
And what we do is we go boots on the ground for water quality advocacy. We do the water quality monitoring from bacteria to microplastics coming from factory farms or other entities that we're trying to identify. We respond to any kind of citizen request on water quality issues. We will either take care of it in-house, figure out how we can be of assistance, or direct our community to the necessary agencies or people who can really help them rectify these situations. We are open to anybody coming through our doors and letting us know what they're concerned about in their community and how we can be of help to protect clean water for all of us.
And 90% of the phone calls that we get from concerned citizens are dealing with stormwater runoff and development. And if you look at the impacts that development has on fisheries, it's very visual, and that's why these fishermen are coming to organizations like ours to get help to improve water quality for fisheries. They can see the impacts, they see them every day, every season.
What can the public do to increase water quality for commercial fishing and recreational fishing? I'd say, man, that's a really good question. First of all, you can support these industries. That's the first thing you can do. Second thing is just be conscious of what you do. What you do in Raleigh is going to affect us down at the coast.
I think it's really important to start your kids really young in teaching them to be ambassadors for the environment and good stewards for the environment, because they are the ones who are going to be cleaning up and dealing with anything that we are causing here. And I think that we've already got a really good start.
Our coastal waters urgently need our help. Science is sounding a clear alert, and our fisheries are depending on us to act. Citizens of North Carolina need to respond by taking immediate action to address these issues. The time to act is now, before the water challenges we face become catastrophic.
When we have commercial fishermen and recreational fishermen coming together, working with organizations like Coastal Carolina Riverwatch, we're really shaping the future of water quality in North Carolina.
it.